Hey everybody, it's been a hot minute since we've done any work on our Project Ranch Rod. Summer got busy for me and now we're getting into winter and it seems like that's when I have most of my shop time. This thing has to get going and running sometime this winter. I don't think I can stand it any longer if it doesn't. So that's one of the big things that I want to get checked off the list this winter is to get the rest of the stuff fired up so we can get this thing fired off and going. The next big piece of the puzzle here that we need to get taken care of is our fuel system. And so we have to have our fuel system sized to be able to run hopefully this 600 horse or so engine setup that we have. You know, that's what I hope it does. And so we have to pay attention to what we want to do here and make sure that we have everything that we're going to need to keep enough fuel going to this. One of the things that makes it interesting, a little difficult as well, this pickup has that factory tank behind the seat. And that's the only tank that this one has. And look at some different options. You know, is there a way to put a pump inside that tank? I've seen on YouTube there's been a few other people that have come up with some things that probably work okay. I thought about maybe utilizing a surge tank or something like that. I've had, I don't know, checkered experience in the past of how well that works. I know some people, of course, use like a 1970 Mustang tank or something like that, put it in the back of the frame rails, and then put the filler tube up into the box. Look at this thing. It's going to get used, you know, so I don't like the idea of a filler net coming up into my box where, you know, who knows what I might be doing with this. It could have deer in the back of it or wood or dirt or who knows what. So I didn't really want to go that route. What we end up doing here is we're going to put an external fuel pump on this. And I don't know what my feelings are there. I know there's good and bad things about that. But when I look at all the different options and what I want to do here, I think that's going to be the easiest. So I'm going to go ahead and the next parts of this video, we'll go into more detail as to what the components of this fuel system are and how we're going to make this thing work using our factory fuel tank in this 69 F-100.
As we've already established multiple times here, there are way smarter people out in YouTube land than I am, but I'll try to make up for it in enthusiasm and truly is the everyday person trying to accomplish some of these things. Some people might be able to envision all this in their head, especially when they're ordering parts and pieces, but for me, I need to sketch all of this out, especially when I went to order parts. So here's what my fuel system is going to look like. There's that factory tank. We're going to go ahead and put a fitting in the bottom of that tank. It's going to go to a fuel filter. It's going to go to our fuel pump, which is going to be mounted there on the frame rails. That's going to be fed up to a fuel pressure regulator, a return style. We're going to return it back to the tank, and then we also have a fitting that's going to go up to our Phytech up there. And so this, of course, details out all the different lengths and sizes and fittings and all that I'm going to end up using. You'll see I'm using a 10 AN line coming out of the bottom of that tank. That is a big old line. That's 5/8 of an inch. And you probably wonder why it's so big. Well, a couple different reasons. One reason is that I wanted to make sure it's big enough that there wouldn't be much restriction to pull fuel out of that tank because it's basically gravity fed there down to the filter. Another good reason is because the pump I have, it's a Bosch F-100, and I had a fuel filter that came with it when I had bought it, and it actually has 10 AN fittings on it, so I thought why not go ahead and use it. Using 8 AN line then to go from my pump up to my fuel pressure regulator, and then I don't know if this is the right thing to do or not. I'm going to use 6 AN to go to the throttle body. I'm going to use 6 AN to return fuel back to the tank. I'm basically going to run line from that fuel pressure regulator. When I go back to the tank, there is a fitting down there on the frame rail that goes up into the cab. I'm going to go ahead and tie into the existing fuel line there and just return it via the factory pickup. I didn't want to use the factory pickup point there that comes into the engine compartment because I thought fuel line might be too restrictive for too long a distance, so we'll just use it just to get up into the cab and back into the tank. But that is what it's all going to look like, and so we'll go ahead and look at some more of our components and where they're going to be mounted. This is the heart of the fuel system right here. This is a Bosch F-100 pump that I bought, It also comes with this System 1 filter. I think it's probably 100 micron. As you can see, this thing is long. I mean, it is approximately 2 feet long the way it's set up there with that pump, filter, fittings, all that sort of thing. So you need a pretty good spot to be able to mount that and keep it clear. Part of the reason, like I said, I chose number 10 coming into the filter here is because that's what the size of the filter is. So that made it easier on the fitting side of things. As far as number 8, well, that's an 8 fitting that was already on the pump there when I bought it. So no reason to make it more difficult than it is. Let's reutilize some of the fittings, since fittings are some of the most expensive part of a fuel system here. And then I go ahead and have these two mounting brackets. They have the rubber inside there, which hopefully will help isolate some of the vibration a little bit. And we'll find a nice spot there on our frame rail, and we'll go ahead and mount that so we can have, you know, easy access, and in case we need to change anything out or take our filter off or whatever the case may be. This Bosch 044 pump, it's known for being a pretty good pump. I mean, it's known for being really noisy, so I guess we'll deal with that as it comes, but it's a lot of flow and handle up with a lot of fuel pressure as well. So in a system where you boost, even though I'm not going to have that much, it flows a lot even at higher fuel pressures. So this should be the heart of this system, and I'll keep my fingers crossed that this will work. Let's talk about this fuel line just real quick. This is a Summit brand line. It's their premium nylon braided line. The reason I went ahead and used this is their premium one is supposed to be good for all different sort of fuel. It doesn't matter what sort of ethanol level is in it, it should be good for it. And so I thought it would be worth a try. Looked like it was fairly affordable compared to some of the other brands that are out there for something that I could run, you know, any sort of fuel in. So that gave the nod. I've never played around with this nylon braided line before. I have played around with that stainless braided line quite a bit, and I know getting fittings on that stainless line can sometimes be interesting when you got those little pieces of stainless, you know, that don't quite want to go into the fitting. This nylon line is really easy to put fittings on. I usually, to cut it, I just wrap it electrical tape, and then I've been using a death wheel, 4-inch death wheel, to go ahead and make my cut. I unwrap the tape, and it really stays nice and tight, and you can pretty much just slam the fitting on there and put the insert in, tighten it up, and away you go. So I have liked the ease of putting fittings on it. And so yeah, I've been using this line for this project in both 10, 8, and 6. So it's all going to be the same sort of line. Going to be a little tough to see under here, but this is essentially where that pump is going to be mounted. There's that factory cross member where the radius arms go. It'll be just barely behind that 2 feet. It's going to be pretty long. It's going to, I think, stretch, if I remember right, from mocking up just past where the transfer case hangs down. But it's a nice bare open frame rail there. There's not much on the inside of it. I think it's going to work okay. Trying to get a better view, you can kind of see where the factory fuel line comes in, and that area is about where it's going to come out. You can kind of see that dirty spot just to the right of where those couple of bolts are for the seat. That's where I'm thinking I'm going to be able to put a bung in the tank and drill a hole through the cab here and be able to drop that fuel line, you know, out the bottom, and then of course come down, have some mounting spots on the frame rail there, and then be able to mount up to where this pump is. So there is one thing I will tell you that I'm not really thrilled about by mounting it on the outside of the frame rail here. I'm going to go ahead and pan as I roll my creeper. Take a look, take a look, take a look. What do we see? I see a tire. Now, for those of you that are in really dry climates and have never heard of such things as mud, this probably would never be an issue for you. But since I'm up here in Montana, and at times we do have some of that nice, sticky, nasty baby crap type mud, if you get your wheel turned just right, it's not unheard of to have everything on your frame rail and all that caked in mud. So I'm not thrilled by that. We'll go ahead and get things mounted up. What we may end up doing is maybe right ahead of the fuel pump, and I'll show you another view once we get it mounted. But may end up putting a little mud flap or something, not totally encase the pump, but to be able to deflect some of that mud that I know will come from them front tires. So I'll show you something else that I took into consideration, but wasn't able to figure out how to make it work. Really fun close quarters underneath here. Part of me got to thinking, if the outside of the frame rail is going to be a problem for that pump and mud and things, keeping things on the inside of the frame rail would probably help out with that. So I did take a look at mounting inside the frame rail. It's just not going to work. As you can see here, there's the cab mount. So that, of course, is the back of the cab, right here. And so if I have any sort of way to get a fuel line into it, that means I have to put the pump, up in this area, but the length of that pump and everything is not going to fit. We got, of course, some of these brackets for mounting the cab. We got our transfer case, all that sort of thing. I looked further up, but then you get to the front drive shaft and all sorts of stuff. And so I'm going to figure out how to make the outside of the frame rail work. There's just no good way I can see how to do this. Maybe you could mount something on the underneath of the cab. I don't know, maybe. But I think it's going to be easier to keep it on the outside frame rail. We'll put a little bit of mud protection type stuff in there if we need to. One of the good things of having it on the outside of the frame rail there, if for some reason that we have to switch out a pump or change a filter or anything, emergency type roadside scenario, it will be a little bit easier to crawl on your back and get to it rather than having to get all the way underneath the vehicle. And it's never in a good situation in the mud or in the gravel or hot road or who knows. So outside the frame it is. One of the biggest challenges that we're going to have is putting this bung in the tank, getting it in the right spot, and getting everything lined up. There's kind of a double layer where we have to go through on that cab, so we got to make sure we drill a hole the right way and get it lined up with where the tank is without having a super huge cavern of a hole there. So here's what I'm intending to do. That grommet, I can see where that grommet was underneath the pickup. I measured out about 2 1/4 inches. Looks like that's a good spot to clear the frame rail and everything. As you can see, I made a mark there. Maybe a little hard to see, but I made a mark there on the cab and also on the tank. There is this flange on the bottom of the tank that fits in the bottom. Little receiver there. So we're going to look in that area and see if that's going to be a good spot. And then what the plan is we'll measure in, make sure it's a good spot on the tank, measure in, make sure it's a good spot on the cab. I have a really long drill bit here, and I'm going to go ahead then, once I'm happy with my spot, and do one hole all the way through both layers of the cab out the bottom. The idea then would be is that I can make sure my tank's in the right spot. I can actually come back from the bottom with my tank back in, of course, and drill a hole into the bottom of the tank. That way, all 3 of those holes should line up. So that's the plan anyway. We'll see how well I execute it. Got the tank out, looking at our mark. So there was our grommet. I measured 2 1/4 inches. You can kind of see our mark right there. Looked like a good spot, to line things up kind of frame rail, make it easy out, easy to mount fuel line with a clip, the frame rail, all that sort of thing. And there happens to be this recess in the cab. I'm not even sure what this recess is for, to tell you the truth. And just by looking at the cab and that recess, actually that doesn't look half bad. Might be a great spot, to come out of the cab here where it's already a little bit lower, not anything that's going to hold anything up. So from this perspective, it sure looks like a winner. However, we probably better look at our tank to see how that works. Remember that I put a mark both on the cab and on the tank. It was just to make sure that we can take a look at both things independently, see if it's going to work. We just looked at the cab, and where the mark is in there's that recess in the cab. Looks like it'd be a good spot. What does our tank tell us? So when we rotate down, looking at our mark, we can see that no bueno, not so good. There's a big dent in there that goes up. So it comes in and it's higher than the rest of the tank. Especially if you're looking to put a bung in the bottom of your tank, you definitely don't want to put it where it's the highest spot. So that's not gonna work for us. We're gonna end up having to move outboard a little bit to come, whoa, hang on, woo! We're gonna have to put our fitting out here somewhere to be in the low spot of our tank. One of the things that I am planning on doing too is I'm planning on cutting a slit in this tank, and I have like some 16 gauge metal or whatever. I'm gonna go ahead and make a baffle, and I'm going to put it in the tank and then weld it back up. So of course welding on gas tanks is always a fantastic great idea, and so we'll there's a couple different ways to do that, but that's the plan. Is, you know, that's the tough thing about just putting a fitting in the bottom of the tank, is that when you get to a certain spot and you get fuel slosh, or you're on an incline or on a side hill or whatever, you know, you can start starving your pump for fuel, and that's not a good thing, not a fantastic thing. So we'll go ahead and put a little baffle in there, and that should go a long ways toward fixing that, but we definitely can't put it in the first spot we thought might work, just because not going to be happy there. All right, here's our number 10 bung that we're going to be using, the steel one, of course. You can see that there's a nice little flange and lip on it, so when we drill our hole the right size, we can just kind of sit in there and then we can weld it in nice. So as we talked about, we'll probably want to put the fitting somewhere in this area so that we have room for our baffle, which we'll probably put here-ish, and then we'll go ahead and weld this in, and it'll be a nice straight drop out the bottom of our tank. So we'll take some final measurements, some final placement, and then we will go from there. I have high hopes that this is the magic place, because it better be now, because now there is a hole. I went ahead and just punched one in real quick for a guide. I have a long bit. I'm going to go ahead and take my long bit, and I'm going to just come in from the top and drill one straight hole from the top all the way through this layer down through the next one, and give us a straight go at it. And then, as we talked about, we'll go ahead and put the tank back in, and then we'll go from the bottom side and we'll come back up through it, and that way all three of our holes should line up.
We finally got our hole drilled all the way through that cab section there. It turned out to be, you know, like everything I do, way tougher than I thought it was going to be. The idea was, if I could drill a 3/16 hole through that first layer, I have one of those long 3/16 bits. I thought I could just go down through the second layer and then make sure, of course, it lines up. As it ends up, that section on the bottom of the cab there's a little bit of an angle, and so it didn't want to line up very well. I finally went ahead and used a step bit, open up the upper hole bigger, about the size of the grommet that I'll end up using, and then from there I was able to use a center punch and center punch a good starting spot, and then, you know, got a hole punched through. So now I have a big hole at the top just underneath the tank, and I have a little 3/16 hole underneath it. So what I will do next is, if you don't have one of these transfer punches, they're well worth the buy. You can buy a set. I have a set from Harbor Freight. It's fairly cheap, and of course they come in all sorts of dimensional sizes, just like your drill bits. So the idea is that you can stick it through a hole and then punch up through something and transfer your mark. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to go underneath, and we're going to go ahead and put this transfer punch up through the hole. And ideally, if we can hold it straight and keep it in the right spot, we should make sure we punch a spot in our tank that's totally lined up with our bottom hole.
Have you ever noticed that lights are like the best thing ever until you can't get them pointed in the spot you actually want them to be? Anyways, so there's my hole that's there in the bottom. You can kind of see that, you know, this is a straight piece here, and then it gets to about here and it starts to angle back down, and that's where our hole ended up being. That's why we had a little bit of issue there. So the idea is, of course, we're going to take our transfer punch, we're going to stick it up there, we're going to try to make sure it gets as square to the world as possible, and then I'm going to go ahead, take a hammer, and I'm going to do a little tap tap tapping, and that should give me a mark on the bottom of that gas tank where my hole needs to be, so I can drill a hole and put that bung in there. We're going to do another thing too, to be able to kind of do a double check to make sure that's in the right spot, but for now we're going to go ahead and transfer a mark.
Let me attempt to paint a little picture for you. So I went ahead and I transferred my mark up to the tank, and we'll do a double check to see if it's lined up or not. I did find some grommets that fit this Humongo number 10 line. This grommet that's at the top is like a diaphragm grommet. It's one of those where you use your knife and you cut out, what diameter you want to use. And so when I cut out the full diameter, it looks like it's going to fit around this fitting. Because by the time that bung's put in that tank and sits down there, it's pretty much going to sit right at that level. So that'll be in that inner layer of the cab. The outer layer on the cab at the bottom will be this grommet. 3/4 inch ID grommet fits fairly tight. I'm going to go ahead and use a Dremel tool with a sanding roll on it and see if I can open up just a skosh, because I'm a little bit afraid I won't be able to get it pushed through all that well. But anyway, that's what's going to go ahead and seal up both the inside and the outside of the cab there, and that's part of the reason why everything needs to be lined up so perfectly between those three layers there. When I'm talking about the fitting, up top, coming down into a spot where it connects to the line, that inner layer of the cab, and then the line going out the exterior layer of the cab. So we're going to go ahead and pull the tank and see if our transfer mark got all the way through, and then I'm going to go ahead and use my step bit, and I'm going to drill that bottom hole out, that exterior layer, out to the diameter that this grommet will fit. And then once I get it opened up, I can go ahead and put an inner mark there on the tank as well. So we'll be able to do a pencil mark, we'll look at my transfer mark, and then hopefully they match up perfectly. If not, we'll split the difference, call it good, and we'll try to get this thing, start putting it together. And then the next major hurdle, of course, is going to be welding that bung to the tank.
Alright, my video doesn't really show it all that well on my camera, but I can look at it with my light. I got my 2 layers drilled. Looks like they're pretty centered up. I wish you could see it on the camera. I'm going to go ahead and take a pencil and reach up through there and go ahead and draw an outline on the tank there, and that way I can make sure and center that up and put my bung in the right spot.
I'm not a mind reader or a psychic or, anything like that, but something's telling me that I need to put my hole right there. That's what the pencil mark turned out. You can kind of see, you can kind of see where my transfer punch mark was. Fairly close to center, but I think the line is a little better representation of it. And so our bung is going to go ahead and go right chair. So we'll go ahead and center that up, and we'll drill a hole, and then we'll use one of the greatest inventions known to man, known as a step bit, and we'll go ahead and make the right size hole, and we'll at least get this thing prepped up and ready to weld. And then the welding of it, we'll have to be careful there so we don't create a bomb, because bombs, although they might be fun, aren't a great thing when you're welding on one. So I have a couple things in mind of what we might do to try to avoid blowing up, and keep watching, see if we attain that goal or not. All right, we're getting real close to our moment of truth time. You can see I went ahead and set the bung in there. I got the help from my 6-year-old to drill the hole, and so we went ahead and drilled it out, and I used my step bit. I think it ended up being right about 1 inch. So of course you can see there's a nice flange on that fitting that fits right in there, so it fits nice. I went ahead and scuffed it up around there. I got my clamp on. Now all I gotta do is just not blow myself up. So here's the plan on how we're going to do this. One way you can do this is you can fill these things full of water, and you can go ahead and do it that way. I'm not going to do that because with the water situation, if you don't get it cleaned out, rinsed out, get gas in it right away, then you run the risk of rust and all that sort of fun stuff. What I'm going to do is another way is you can fill it with some sort of gas, of course, that doesn't burn, of which exhaust is one of those. I'm going to go ahead and take this filler spout. I'm going to go over to my old Power Stroke. I'm going to put this right in the end of the exhaust pipe, and then it's going to go ahead and fill up with exhaust. And when I've done this before, you can actually, at a certain point, I'll be able to see exhaust, coming out this hole. without exhaust coming out, it won't be able to ignite, and so I'll be able to just weld, you know, all around this and get that bung put in there. I was thinking about, you know, making a cut in here and putting in some sort of baffle. I think for now I'm not going to. I'm going to see how well it works. We do have this dent that we talked about earlier. In some ways, if we use our imagination, that dent is kind of like a little bit of a baffle. You know, just imagine with me, and well, let's just think it'll work. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set up, and let's get this thing welded. Might be a little tough to hear, but here's the setup. So I went ahead and I have the filler of this gas tank put in the exhaust pipe of this old Power Stroke. Got a block up there so I can get to it. And so we're filling that tank. And if we get closer, we can see where our bung goes. And I know, of course, you can't feel it on the video. You can see it a little bit, but she is puffing smoke right out of that hole. So we'll be able to, here's, of course, once again, there's my ground connection. We'll be able to put the bung in there, and we'll be able to safely weld this tank, and won't have any risk of any explosion activities or anything like that. So if you're curious what an advanced welding setup looks like, this is it. I do have just a flux core Harbor Freight welder I use for outside type stuff, and so that's the welder I'm going to be using for this, because there's too much breeze and stuff out here, too much exhaust coming out. It wouldn't be real good for a MIG setup. And by the way, if you can add a little horse poop and stuff around the area, it just really adds to it. Sorry to disappoint you viewers, but there was no explosion, so we had a pretty good setup. So the bung is now welded in there. I will tell you there was definitely some rookie mistakes though too. You know, flux core. Flux core's dirty, you know, and it spatters and all sorts of stuff. I'm not a great welder anyway, so it looks pretty terrible, and we might grind on that some, and we might not. I think we got it so it won't leak. But here's part of the rookie mistake. See some of that spatter on that fitting? I should have had that fitting covered. You know, maybe even had my hose end on there or something prior to welding. So now I'm going to have to try to clean all that spatter off this fitting before I can ever do anything with a hose end. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that. I'm going to go ahead and clean up, grind on that just a little bit, beautify it, just make sure I don't have any big holes that I'm missing. And then, you know, I might even mix up some JB Weld and just kind of smear it all around there and let it set up just in case there are any little pinholes so it doesn't leak. And I think we're a step closer to getting ready to put in the pickup. The tank is set back in for what I hope is the final time. It was a little bit of a bear trying to get everything lined up, get that hose fitting underneath there. You know, there's this flange that sits down in this tank, so you kind of have to keep the tank high enough to get your hand or a wrench or something underneath it. I ended up using a 2x4 block, put it on the other side to get some height, so I was able to reach underneath it and finally got it. So let me show you what it looks like underneath. Here's what the finished product looks like with the line coming out. There should have been a grommet up underneath the tank, underneath the tank on that first inner layer. It ended up falling through on me, which is unfortunate, but I guess that's the way it is. So I need to get this one for two reasons: to make sure the cab's weather tight. Also, because this hose would have rubbed a little bit, you know, on some of that steel. And so I wanted to, you know, make sure and hold it in spot. That grommet was a total bear cat to get in. I said lots of cuss words, all the ones I knew. I think I even made up a couple, but it is in there. So I went ahead and have my hose, have the fitting on the other end of it. I'd kind of mocked up where I think the pump is going to go roughly without drilling any holes or anything. So I might just go ahead and connect it and take one more little video clip, show you kind of where I'm at. So there's that same fuel line snaking down here. It's going to go right into this filter, which goes right into the pump. And so now that I have that, there's I have a fuel line bracket. I think I can use one of those existing holes, so I'll go ahead and attach that line, and then I'll use that to dictate where my pump goes, because I got some flexibility, you know, forward and backward here. And so yeah, the next time you see this, it's going to be all mounted up, and then hopefully it gets
easier from here. I figured that tank was going to be the hard part of it, and so let's move on. Let's get moving. Fuel pump and filter is officially mounted, so that's always a good feeling to get another big step done, and I'm soon going to be done with being under this rig, hopefully. I did happen to buy a new set of drill bits before starting this project because my old drill bits were just getting terrible. I would have been better off just trying to, use the center punch, try to punch everything through. They were pretty bad. These new bits just went through like butter, and so we went ahead and got our bolts through there and got our brackets mounted. One of the things I'm missing is I still have a line clamp I'm going to mount to the frame. And of course, when I was at the hardware store buying bolts, I forgot to buy a bolt for that. So next trip there, I will go ahead and get a bolt, and I will get my clamp up, and I'll put the line about that area right there. So that should be pretty good. So next piece of puzzle, we'll be looking at our number 8 line that's going to come off the front of this pump and routing it up to where our fuel pressure regulator is. Speaking of fuel pressure regulator, let's see what we got going on here. So we have a Holley return style regulator. It's supposed to be preset at 60 psi, which the Phytech is supposed to be 58 psi, so extra 2 psi really isn't going to hurt it any. This regulator also has a port where you can put a barb fitting for boost reference, 1-to-1 pressure ratio change for every pound of boost. And so right now there's just a plug in place there that I will go ahead and put the fitting. Right now I just have the regulator sitting loose in the bracket, although the bracket is mounted to the inner fender well. Let me take a look from the top, kind of show you how everything fits, relationship to one another. So I tried to find what I thought might be a good spot, and I don't know, I think this is going to work. It's out of the way of the brake line. When I put that barbed fitting somewhere in there, right there, it's going to miss the brake line. We have a 45 going down. That's where my input feed is going to go, my number 8 line. Underneath there, you can see right now I have a 90-degree fitting in the bottom. I don't know if a 90-degree or a straight is going to be what we're going to use for return line, but we'll figure that out. Right now these fittings are just threaded in here. I didn't use any sealant or anything quite yet while I'm in my mock-up stage. I went ahead and put my 90-degree fitting for my number 6 line. That'll be the feed to the Phytech coming out, and part of the reason I wanted to do that is I wanted to see how well I could line everything up. So let me see if I can find a good angle here. If we look to the spring, it's hard to show this. There, maybe we can see that a little bit. So you can see where the regulator is. You can see the 90-degree fitting. If I tilt a little bit, it lines right up with my feed that's going into the Phytech. So we have our 10 micron fuel filter there. Then we have be a female to female union, and we have a gauge fitting, and then we have a banjo that goes right into the Phytech. Let me give you a different look at the Phytech here. So once again, that'll be the fuel rail. It's going to feed the Phytech. Got the fuel pressure gauge right front and center where you can see it. Got the fuel filter in a spot where it should be easy to change if need be, but we're keeping it up off the valve cover a little bit so no direct touch to heat. Then we'll pan back. Should be a straight shot right there to the fuel pressure regulator. So we got this mocked up pretty well. I still have my number 6 line that is still on back order, but I can at least get my 8 feed to the regulator completed, and then once I get my line in, I can finish the rest of it up. One more piece of the puzzle completed. I went ahead and made up this fuel line that goes from our fuel pressure regulator over here in the inner fender well, and it goes of course over to our throttle body unit, our Phytech. I think it's set up in such a way it should work okay. I have it so the fuel line will not touch the valve cover. As far as how it's gonna be oriented, it's pretty close to this. Once we tighten everything up, of course, I might try to put a little more gap between the valve cover and where the fuel line goes. But other than that, I think it's gonna work pretty good. As we come around this angle, you can see it's pretty much a straight shot from the regulator over to the throttle body. 90-degree fitting on one end, straight fit on the other, so it's one of those that's easy to get on there and easy to connect, no binding, anything like that. The length seems about right. So I think I'm pretty happy with that. So now we only have one part left as far as our plumbing goes, and that is to go ahead and put our return line from our fuel pressure regulator back to our tank. Let's talk about our master plan here with return line. So it's connected up to the return port fuel pressure regulator. It's going to come down here. I got to get the routing, right, but I'm just looking at length and stuff like that right now. So it'll come in those lower bolts on both the fuel pump and the filter. I think I'll just use a little bracket off that lower stud, so I'll be able to route the return line neatly underneath both fuel pump and the fuel filter, and then we'll kind of run in this vicinity. And then there's this chunk of hose right here. Let me orient my video correctly. There's this piece that, well, there's a rubber fuel line. This is a piece that goes up to the front of the pickup. This is a piece then that goes inside the cab and then runs into the fuel tank. So this is the factory fuel feed that comes from the tank, of course, ran down through here, ran to the front of the pickup, and then went to the carburetor. I could have probably teed into this hard line up at the front, but I think looking at this line, it might even be like a 5/16. So in order to make it so it flowed better, I went with a 6 AN line, and I'm going to come, all the way and get into this right here. We'll see if I regret it in the future, if I should have just went entirely right back to the tank, but I guess we'll find out. So some of you might be wondering, okay, I got this nice braided line. I put a lot of nice AN fittings at the end of it. What's my plan right here? Well, this is what it's going to look like. I have a fitting with a bar bend on one side, it's 6 AN on the other. The idea is that we're going to go ahead and we're going to get it shoved into this fuel line, and then I'll be able to put a hose end on my braided line and be able to connect into it. So that's the master plan right now. This old line might be a little bit, they get brittle, don't want to do much. So I think I have some other fuel line. I'll take a look. Either that, or sometimes with the heat gun, you can kind of bring them back to life a little bit, enough to get this shoved in there. So that's my thoughts for right now. And then, assuming that's all going to work, I'll have all my plumbing done for the feed, for the return, everything. One thing I'll do before I go ahead and get this plumbed in is that when I crack this off here, I'm going to take an air compressor and I'm going to blow back through here, just in case that sock fitting is a little, inside the tank is a little, gummed up or whatever. As long as air blows through nice, we're good to go. If for some reason we have a major air restriction, we might have to look at plan B. Let's work on wrapping this video up. So let's take a look. Everything's tightened up now. All my different hose clamps and different hose holders are all in there now. And this is kind of what it looks like. So it's in a spot I don't think things are going to move around all that much. Double clamped where that hose goes on to that factory fuel feed line, and that's of course going to be our return now. So you can see that we added some hose clamps, what I'm going to call clamps, I guess, to go ahead and hold it there to the same sort of brace area that our fuel filter is on. We have one at the bottom here where our fuel pump is. We have one more on the frame rail there, so this should be pretty good to go. And what does the top side look like? Well, here it is. So I went ahead and took it all apart, put thread sealant on different fittings that go into that fuel pressure regulator, got them clocked the way that I want them to be, and got the hoses ran up to it, and got them tightened. Got everything tightened up here at the throttle body with the different fittings that's going to the banjo fitting, my gauge, my filter, the whole 9 yards. So I'm going to end this video here, I think. What's left to do is that there's a trigger wire that comes from the Phytech. It's an orange wire if I remember right. And so that wire will be connected to trigger a relay, and then there will be power that comes directly from the battery
That'll go through that relay. That'll then go to the fuel pump. And then, that'll be the electrical side taken care of as well. And so I think this installation is going to work okay. I hope the fuel pump's big enough to be able to, flow enough fuel for what I want it to do. And I guess if something comes up, we'll address it as it comes. But thanks for checking this out. And hopefully this will help some of you that are maybe doing some similar projects on your either bump side, dent side, or heck, even some of your newer vehicles. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them down into the comments and I'll answer them as I go. And thank you for viewing.